Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we're going to explore exactly how we process trauma, how we build our habits, and, well, how we actually change our lives. But we're not doing this from some ivory tower, right? No dense academic theories here. We're looking at this through the gritty, practical lens of a real-world recovery program. We'll be unpacking actual session notes from a facilitator named Chris. And let me tell you, his insights aren't just theory. They are battle-tested in some of the hardest corners of human experience. So let's just dive right in.
Before we get into the actual mechanics of change, let me ask you a question that I think, honestly, we all wrestle with at some point. Why do we self-sabotage? Why do we make decisions that actively hurt our long-term goals or our relationships? It's super easy to judge ourselves for this, but I want to validate something absolutely crucial right up front. What we often label as bad decisions, they're actually just deeply ingrained survival mechanisms. You see, our brains are hardwired for survival in a crisis, not necessarily for long-term happiness. When trauma or stress takes over, our logic gets completely hijacked by those primal survival instincts.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that these aren't your typical, polished, mass-produced textbook graphics. What you're looking at are the authentic, battle-tested notebook sketches taken directly inside that recovery room by an observer. Just look at those raw, real-world notes mapping out human behavior and the flow of our thoughts. You can really see the facilitator and the note-taker working together to ground some incredibly high-level psychology, stuff like cognitive behavioral therapy, into pure, everyday human reality. It's just beautiful because it's theory turned into a literal survival tool.
Section 1. The Human Event Chain. How we process. Let's look at how this sequence actually plays out.
So, how exactly does this mental machine work? Well, it all happens in a specific, observable cognitive chain. First, there's an event in the outside world. That event triggers an automatic thought in your brain. That thought then immediately creates an internal feeling. And finally, that feeling dictates your action or your behavior. It seems like a perfectly logical straight line, right? But here's the critical problem. Trauma often forces us to skip steps. When we're operating out of old wounds, our brain perceives a literal life or death emergency that isn't actually there. So we jump straight from an event to a reactive action, completely bypassing rational thought. We flinch, we yell, we run away, all because our brain genuinely thinks it's saving our life.
Section 2. The metacognitive pause. Interrupting the chain. Okay, let's dive into this and see how we break that cycle. This right here is where we actually gain control over our lives. I want to introduce you to the absolute secret weapon used to interrupt that destructive cognitive chain, metacognition. Essentially, this is the ability to think about your own thinking. In practice, it means noticing when a feeling arises within you and then consciously forcing yourself to pause. You use that pause to rethink the automatic thought that caused the feeling in the first place. This is your specific intervention point. If you can catch a distorted belief before it spirals into a negative feeling, you can stop yourself from taking a regrettable action. You're literally inserting a gap between the world's stimulus and your response.
The facilitator, Chris, delivered this really profound insight to his class. He said, if you're not rethinking your thoughts, you are failing yourself. Just take a second to think about how powerful that is. Failing to challenge our own defense mechanisms? That's what keeps us completely trapped in a cycle of pain. You know, your first thought is usually just a conditioned reflex, a shadow of your past. And if you don't challenge it, well, your past just gets to dictate your present. Moving on to Section 3. The Freedom Ladder Macro Framework.
So the metacognitive pause is an amazing micro-level tool, but we also need a macro framework, right? A way to decide what to do next. Look closely at these raw stick figure doodles and the structural numbers mapped down the page. This is the 6-rung framework for decision-making. What we're seeing here is how abstract moral philosophy, specifically Kohlberg's stages of moral development, translates into everyday survival. It's taking complex academic theory and turning it into a tangible visual map that someone can actually use when they're tempted to fall back into old destructive habits.
Let's just cleanly walk through these 6 rungs of the ladder, starting right from the bottom. Rung 1 is pain and pleasure. This is basic hedonistic survival. You do something just because it feels good or to avoid immediate pain. Moving up, rung 2 is back scratching, quid pro quo. Basically, I'll help you if you help me. Rung 3 is approval seeking, doing things just to please others and get that validation. Then there's rung 4, law is the law, which is adhering to rules and structures because they provide order. As we climb higher, we get noticeably less self-centered.
Rung 5 is the social contract, doing what's best for your community or your family. And finally, sitting all the way at the top is rung 6, universal ethical principles. This is acting for the greater good, completely regardless of the personal cost to yourself.
Section 4. Measuring our motives. Testing the ladder. Let's see how this plays out in real life. So, we have the ladder, now we're going to test how this actually operates, because every single decision you make is motivated by one of these rungs. Take a super simple behavior, like driving 55 miles per hour down the road. If you're doing it simply because you don't want a speeding ticket, you're operating at the very bottom on rung 1, avoiding pain. But if you're driving 55 because you genuinely don't want to risk hurting anyone else on the road, you're operating way up at rung 5, the social contract. And this brilliantly illustrates how the exact same physical behavior can be driven by completely different moral rungs.
So the absolutely crucial point we learned from this recovery session is that morality is actually a portfolio allocation. It's not some binary choice between being a good person or a bad person. And this is such a therapeutically shrewd point. You shouldn't try to completely eliminate your base impulses. I mean, we all need to avoid pain sometimes, right? We all need approval sometimes. Instead, the goal is to minimize their percentage in your life. You want to consciously shift the bulk of your daily motives upward toward that social contract. You're aiming for steady progress, not absolute, impossible purity.
Section 5. Personality versus true self. Integrating identity. Let's move to and see how this builds into our final takeaway. To truly climb that ladder, you've got to know who is actually doing the climbing. Look at how this whiteboard drawing places the heart right in the middle, sitting perfectly between personality on the left and ego or the true self on the right. In this framework, your personality is made up of your learned attitudes, beliefs, and defense mechanisms, things heavily formed by your trauma and society. On the flip side, your true self is your natural talents, your hobbies, your inherent passions. Placing the heart right in the center emphasizes that true happiness comes from connection, not control. It's all about getting these two sides to, act as one.
What this means in practice is that we need to integrate our scarred defenses with our authentic true self. Listen, your trauma-formed personality isn't some enemy that you have to destroy. Actually, those defense mechanisms kept you alive when you needed them. But now they're just a part of you that needs to be aligned with their inner passions and natural talents so they don't block your true happiness moving forward.
But hey, do not expect this to be easy. Chris shares this really grounded, battle-tested wisdom with his room. If you're looking for perfect, you've already failed. I absolutely want you to take that away from this explainer. Friction is basically required for growth. If you go through life trying to avoid all hardship or demanding that you execute this perfectly every single time, you're only going to create unnecessary suffering for yourself. It's the working through the trauma, the embracing of that daily friction, that actually brings you to peace.
Which brings us to the end of our explainer, and I want to leave you with a rather provocative question. Are you letting your past trauma write your future contracts? We all have an internal locus of control. The next time an event triggers a massive emotional reaction in you, use that metacognitive pause. Just notice the feeling, rethink the thought, and measure your motive on the freedom ladder. You can't change what happened to you in the past, but you are entirely in control of what you do next. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Keep learning, keep rethinking, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.